Good day, South Africa, and welcome to another session of Learn Extra Exam Revision. I'm Colleen Lucas, and I will be taking you through Paper 2 for the History exam. The section we will be busy with today is South Africa emerging as a democracy. The first thing I need you to take into account is that each paper has its own key, or each section has its own key question. For this particular question, which comes out of the November exam from 2012, the key question reads as follows: what were the various obstacles that South Africa faced on the road to democracy? And the first thing you need to always do is to rephrase. So, in other words, when we're talking about obstacles, we're talking about what stopped South Africa's journey to democracy. Now, given the fact that we are currently a democracy, we know that nothing actually stopped South Africa's road to democracy, but there were things in the way of that particular path. And that is what this particular section is about. If you look at the sources, the first thing that I always want my learners to do is to label the sources according to the key question. So if you look at the first source is an extract which focuses on F.W. de Klerk's reform measures after 1990. This source focuses on the reforms introduced by F.W. de Klerk in 1990, in which he announced the unbanning of the ANC, the Communist Party of South Africa, the Pan-Africanist Congress, the scrapping of the Separate Amenities Act, the lifting of the emergency media regulations, and a moratorium or suspension on the death penalty. They say that the biggest or most sensational of all of the announcements was that Nelson Mandela and other political prisoners would be released from prison. Okay? I have mentioned once before that when it comes to sources, we should never focus on what we don't know, and we should always look at the information that we do know. So even if you do not know who Frederick van Zyl is, it's still important for you to carry on and to read the source thoroughly. So van Zyl asked F.W. de Klerk what had moved him to make the announcement. The answer to that was that he had experienced a spiritual leap away from apartheid, and that he would have been a fool not to take advantage of the gap that the fall of communism in Eastern Europe had provided. He goes on to say that in theory, or rather the source goes on to say that in theory, F.W. de Klerk could have just followed P.W. Botha's example, and that if he had decided to do that, that it would have destroyed the South African economy completely. So the first source really is taking you back to the first question in paper 1. However, you need to not make the mistake of repeating all of your knowledge from the first section and then trying to put it into this particular section. Okay? Right. So the question reads as follows. Why, according to the source, is the 2nd of February 1990 regarded as a significant date in South Africa's history? And again, I'm going to draw your attention to the mark allocation. It is asking for 2 reasons. And that one over there tells us that it's just an extraction question and that you have to extract from the source. Okay? So there are 2 answers for that. And that is that the 2nd of February led to the unbanning or the unbanning of the ANC, PAC and Communist Party of South Africa, and that there were other reforms and then you can mention those reforms as stated in the source. But I really want to draw your attention to the mark allocations once again, that when you see 2 times 1, it really is asking you to extract evidence from the source. Let's move on to the next question. It asks, it says, explain whether you agree with F.W. de Klerk's statement that he would have been a fool not to take advantage of the gap that the fall of communism in Eastern Europe had provided. In other words, it is asking, do you agree that F.W. de Klerk could have made a mistake if he had not taken the opportunity to negotiate with the ANC? Okay. Once again, mark allocation tells you that they want 2 answers, and the second 2 means that you have to explain the answer. So what you really do need to take into account is that the road to democracy wasn't an easy road at all. That after the unbanning of the ANC and PAC and Communist Party of South Africa, there were a lot of changes that had to come into account, not only in policy, but also among South Africans themselves. And there are many people, or at the time there were many people in South Africa that did not want an end to the apartheid system. Okay? Now, taking that into account, you have to also bear in mind that although there is a link between the first question, which is the impact of the collapse of the Soviet Union on South Africa, although there is a link between the impact of the collapse of the Soviet Union on South Africa and South Africa on the road to democracy, this particular question, South Africans' road to democracy, is a much broader question and could focus on any of the aspects, any of the reasons for the collapse of the apartheid system. So here, particularly in this source, they are asking you to look at the fall of communism in Eastern Europe as one of the reasons for the negotiations. And according to the memorandum, okay, there are many answers, but you have to first state whether or not you agree or disagree with the statement, or with a statement that F.W. de Klerk could have been a fool not to take advantage. After that, whatever your answer is, just as long as you explain it in a full sentence and that you substantiate and back up your answer, you will be able to get those 2 ticks next to each of your answers. So just to name a few answers, or to mention a few answers, the one is that the ANC, PAC, and Communist Party of South Africa was no longer a threat and just fix that. And then another answer is, and I'm just trying to find a different one, is that liberation movements like these mentioned over here were also under pressure to negotiate. Okay, so as you can see, 2 questions explained. You would use full sentences rather than just saying, using a dash there. Okay, let's move on to the next question. Okay, so the next source is from an article that appeared on the 6th of February in the August newspaper. Okay, and I want you to have a look at the source, bearing in mind what the key question was. So the key question really is focusing on what the obstacles to South Africa's road to democracy actually were. So although the first source that we looked at might have been about the reasons why F.W. de Klerk decided to go into negotiations with the ANC, the second source really does look at obstacles to South Africa moving onto its road to democracy. And it reads as follows. President de Klerk could bask in the approval of almost all the political parties yesterday, referring to when he made his announcement. The first day of a joint debate on his speech at the opening of Parliament. Predictably, resistance came from the Conservative Party. Now, the Conservative Party was a breakaway party from the National Party, and they didn't agree with the reforms that were introduced by P.W. Botha in the beginning when he introduced his tricameral parliament. Conservative Party leader Dr. A.D. Trenecht said Mr. de Klerk had awakened the tiger in the Afrikaner. With this most revolutionary speech on Friday. So the revolutionary speech we are talking about is when he announced that he was going to unban the ANC, PAC, and South African Communist Party, or Communist Party of South Africa. There were roars of laughter. That is how Parliament responded to the Conservative Party's claim. There was more laughter when Dr. Trenecht referred to reports of Vive Kamrade de Klerk cry in the streets of Cape Town. Dr. Trenecht maintained that Mr. de Klerk did not have a mandate for a new South Africa that was open to the African National Congress and communist leaders, and that he had misled the voters. In other words, he's saying that the National Party's voters did not agree to a new South Africa. The Conservative Party is to launch a campaign for a free nation in its own fatherland, with the aim of rallying at least 1 million supporters. So just to go to the top of this source quickly, the point over here is that almost all of the other political parties were happy with F.W. de Klerk's announcement, except for parties like the Conservative Party. So let's look at the question. And I want you to bear in mind what the key question is all about. The key question is about what were the obstacles to South Africa's road to democracy. So the question reads as follows. What do you think Trenecht meant when he declared that de Klerk had awakened the tiger in the Afrikaner? It's an opinion-based question. Wants to know what do you think? And it's only asking for one answer, and it asks you to explain. So one of the suggested answers is that F.W. de Klerk's announcement had revived the desire of the Afrikaners to fight to preserve apartheid. Or that it had angered the Afrikaners and they are now willing to fight to preserve apartheid. Okay. The other question, or the next question, reads, explain whether Trenecht was justified in his comments against de Klerk. Over here we are focusing on whether or not you think that he was justified. In other words, do you, the learner, do you think that he was right or wrong in his statements or his comments against F.W. de Klerk? And for this, you must always state whether or not he was justified. So you respond directly to the question by saying, yes, he was justified, or no, he was not justified. And then the question is asking you to give two answers, which you have to explain. It has to be in a full sentence. Okay. So because the question says 2 times 2, you can't assume that you're just going to get 2 marks for saying, yes, he was justified. You still have to give your 2 separate answers after that. And according to the memorandum, Reasons for him possibly being justified was that Afrikaners had a right to determine their own future or fatherland. And then the second answer is that de Klerk did not have a mandate. Or instead of mandate, let's say, did not have the approval of voters to bring about a new South Africa. Likewise, if you say that no, he was not justified, you'd also have to substantiate your answer with two explanations, for which you would get 2 marks each. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. It says that you need to give 2 reasons, and they are emphasizing that they want you to give 2 reasons. They're giving it in 2 places. From the source that suggests that Trenecht was opposed to de Klerk's vision for a new South Africa. And for that, because it's telling you to get it from the source, and because it's number 1 over there, basically they are only asking you to extract from the source. So therefore, it doesn't necessarily have to be a full question or full sentence. It could be a phrase, and it could be taken directly from the source. Okay. And it can be any of those answers that you see over there in the source. Let's move on to the next source. And the next source is a cartoon by Fred Moton, which appeared in Die Burger on the 10th of February 1990. It shows Andries Trenecht's attitude towards multi-party talks. So, unlike this source over here, which is an article that appeared in the August, on the 6th of February, the next one is actually a cartoon with the same subject matter, which appeared in Die Burger on the 10th of February 1990. And it is an Afrikaans cartoon. It is translated over here for you. It says, "Morning, morning, and how awake is our tiger this morning?" And here they've got a depiction of Trenecht. Okay. And they've got a tiger over here. Okay, and then they've labeled this as violence. Now, I'm going to repeat my whole statement that I made earlier on, that when you see something in a cartoon that you perhaps don't understand, don't fret over it. Don't overcomplicate the cartoon. Just look at what you do understand. So if I may just simplify it for you, what I mean is that you look at What is it saying over here? How awake is our tiger this morning? By tiger, as seen in the other source, they're talking about the desire of Afrikaners to fight, to keep apartheid, despite F.W. de Klerk's reforms. The tiger over here is also that desire shown. There's the word that shows the desire. There's the tiger in the cage. There we have Trenecht. Okay. You can't really see this. It says Quis. And then there's some kind of an animal over there. And we are going to assume that we have no idea what that animal is, and that we have no idea who that person is, and we are only going to focus on what we do see or what we do understand in the picture. It really is important that you don't fret over the things that you do not understand in the cartoon, be it the man standing in the corner or the strange tortoise-looking animal on the ground, and that you only focus on what the cartoon, on what the examiners are asking you to focus on in the cartoon. So the caged tiger, for example, as well as Trenecht saying, have we awakened the tiger yet, or is our tiger awake yet? So let's look at the question. It says that you need to explain the messages. Just get my pen ready. It's asking you to explain the messages of the cartoon. And already there's a clue there. It's asking for 2 messages. And the second, number 2 over there, is saying that you need to explain, that you're not simply extracting information from the source or from the caption because it is a cartoon. Okay. And the answer is, it could be anything from that the Conservative Party was willing, let's say was, willing to use violence to preserve apartheid. Another, and then for that you would get your 2 ticks. Just put that there. And then another answer would be that Trenecht was not ready for a new South Africa or change. Okay, and for that, once again, you would get your 2 marks as indicated by the second 2. Right, let's move on to the next question. The next question asks us to comment on whether or not the cartoonist gives an accurate portrayal of events. Accuracy simply refers to is the portrayal true? And sometimes the best way of answering this question is to say, it is true that, or it is a well-known fact, that, or even that there are other sources that confirm that. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is that we must not become afraid when we see when the question's asking us for accuracy. There is a clear difference between usefulness, reliability, accuracy, and limitations. But if you try and start out by using any one of these phrases, for example, it is accurate because it is true that, or it is accurate because it is a well-known, fact that, or there are other sources that confirm that, and then you move on to your answer, you'll find that it's a lot easier for you to try and articulate yourself or to explain what you are trying to say. So, just to give you an example, the mark allocation is asking you for 2 answers. You will say, it is accurate, and then you will explain why you think it's accurate. So you would say, and you need two reasons. So you would say, it is well known that the Conservative Party did not support the new South Africa, and then for your next question you could say, or answer, you could say, there are other sources that confirm that the Conservative Party was willing to use violence. And that's how you handle those questions like accuracy. Now I think it's time for us to go for a bit of a break so that you can have a little bit of time to think about that. And welcome back to this session of Learn Extra exam revision. We are now going to move on to the next question, which is a comparison question. I know a lot of you are interested to see how those comparison questions should be answered. The question reads, compare sources 2 and 3 and explain to what extent these sources are similar regarding the Conservative Party's reaction to the political changes in South Africa. Now, a very easy way to deal with this question is always to start with the word both. It just helps you articulate yourself a lot better. But you need to take into account the fact that it's asking you to what extent. So first you need to state to a large extent. And if you disagree, then you will say not at all. Okay? But if you look at the sources again, you'll see that in this source, they're referring to, it's the article in which the Afrikaner tiger is being threatened, or rather the Conservative Party is making the threat that the Afrikaner tiger will be awakened. And in the next source, it shows the actual cartoon of the Afrikaner tiger in a cage, which is almost about to be awakened according to Trenecht. So just going back to the question, if you start your answer with both, then it becomes a lot easier, because now you can say both sources refer to the threat of the Conservative Party to use violence. To prevent a new South Africa. And then you can move on to another answer, which could be that both sources show the position of the Conservative Party with regards to F.W. de Klerk's reforms. Okay, so just to show you quickly, we're saying both sources refer to the threat of the Conservative Party to use violence to prevent a new South Africa. You would get 2 marks because you are showing that you are able to compare the 2 sources. Instead of first looking at the one source and then looking at the other one, you have dealt with both sources at the same time, and therefore you are credited with 2 marks. And then for the next one, you've done the same thing, used a completely different reason. You've said both sources show the position of the Conservative Party with regards to F.W. de Klerk's reforms. And for that, once again, you will get your 2 marks. Right, so let's move on to the next question. Okay, and the next question asks us to move on to the next source. It says, this source consists of 2 extracts once again on the process of negotiations. Okay, and you've got extract 1. If you look further down, you'll have extract 2. So this extract deals with the AWB's attempt to disrupt the negotiations at the World Trade Center in Kempton Park. Okay? It reads that the authorities were comprehensively violated when several hundred AWB supporters, many of them drunk, led by Eugene Terblanche, invaded and vandalized the building, shouting racist abuse and tearing up documents. It was potentially a dangerous situation. So it wasn't quite yet a dangerous situation, but it could have been. And a witness to the invasion said that he was convinced that violence, which could have led to civil war, was averted by two young policemen who threatened the mob with automatic weapons and forced them to retreat. So the first extract basically is about this failed attempt, which through the use of, or through the threat of violence by policemen, was averted. And then the second source, or the second extract, highlights the need for negotiations in South Africa after the storming of the World Trade Center by the AWB. So extract 2 is about the actual event, or extract 1 is about the actual event, and then extract 2 is about, or is a commentary after the event, okay? And it discusses the following, or it makes the following point. It says, under fortress-like conditions at Kempton Park, the various parties engaged in intense negotiations over various draft interim constitutions and the structure of the transitional executive council that would govern the country in the run-up to the elections, and the establishment of the Constitutional Court, and the nature of the proposed Bill of Rights. Joe Slovo drafted a paper setting out the scenario for a negotiated settlement. It contained concessions, later known as the Sunset Clause, that were arguably pivotal in paving the way for a peaceful transition. At the heart of these was the suggestion that the African National Congress accept a government of national unity for a period of 5 years after the first election. So let's go back to the question again. It says, according to extract 1, why did the AWB invade the World Trade Center? Now, I'm not going to go through the answer with you, but what I will remind you of is the fact that you need to take into account the mark allocations. Here, the mark allocation is asking you to simply extract information from the source. And there's also a clue over here in the question where it says, according to the extract. Why did the AWB invade the World Trade Center? Moving on to the next question, it reads, explain whether you agree with the manner in which the policemen dealt with the AWB agitators. So here, this question's asking for a full sentence. And once again, it's your own knowledge. It's asking you to explain. And it's asking you for 2 answers. So let's quickly look at what the memo has to say. First of all, you have to state whether or not you agree or disagree. Without stating whether or not you agree or disagree, we can't credit the answer because you're simply just not answering the question. So you need to remember at all times, you have to take a stance, you have to say whether or not you agree. The same applies to other questions such as usefulness and reliability. So you'd start off by saying it is useful, or it is reliable, or it is accurate, or in this case, whether or not you agree or disagree. And then remember, it's asking for two answers, which according to the memo state that, okay, so in the memo it first deals with agree. So this particular learner says, I agree because they, as in the policeman, had a duty to protect public property, because remember the AWV members were vandalizing the World Trade Center. And the second answer, according to the memo over here, is that they had a duty to protect the public. So what makes this question correct, even though it's asking whether or not you agree, is the fact that you've answered the question by stating whether or not you agree, and you've given two answers as instructed by the mark allocation, and you have explained in full sentences as instructed by the mark allocation. Let's move on to the next question. It reads, what impact did the storming of the World Trade Center have on the process of negotiations? Okay? And it's telling you to refer to extract 2 specifically. Once again, you'll notice there's just one answer, and as indicated by the mark allocation, they want you to explain. So you can't simply just put a one-word answer down. It's not a quick answer. You have to actually show your understanding. And according to the memorandum, it says here that it made, sorry, now I'm not using full sentences, okay? The impact of the storming was that it made politicians realize that the AWB was a threat to democracy. Okay, now let's move on to the next question. And this particular question is really testing your knowledge and how hard you as a learner has studied. Okay? It asks you to comment on the significance of the sunset clause as proposed by Joe Slovo. Okay, so just a little bit of background into the sunset clause. The sunset clause was suggested. It was the clause that basically brought about the government of national unity. So whereas before the ANC or whatever political party would have won the elections, they would have ruled on their own. Now, according to the sunset clause, they will be ruling within a multi-party democracy with other political parties on board as well. So it's asking you to comment on the significance, which means that you have to say whether or not it was important. And the answer that we have here is that the sunset clause, was important because it made provision for the government of national unity and remember, according to the mark allocation, it's asking us for 2 answers and it's asking us to actually explain. We have to show our understanding. And then the next question or the next answer that they have here is that the National Party cooperated and dropped the group rights demands. And once again, by group rights, what we mean is that instead of focusing on the rights of an individual group, now the National Party is considering at looking at the rights of an entire united South Africa. Now that brings us to the end of this session. I hope that you've enjoyed it and that you're feeling a lot more comfortable with answering this question. From me, Colleen, goodbye.